The Moving Marketplaces project ran from 2019 to 2022 and investigated the people and practices of urban and rural marketplaces in 4 different countries: the UK, the Netherlands, Spain and Switzerland. It was funded by HERA, Humanities in the European Research Area. The project looked at how marketplaces are produced as inclusive spaces through the mobility practices of traders. In this video, we will be talking to the people involved and hear some of the conclusions and challenges from this innovative project.
The aim of the Moving Marketplaces project was to understand how markets emerge and function as important public spaces. And we do that particularly through the lens of the people that actually make the markets work, the traders. Previous research did show how markets were very important. They still serve millions of people across the world, despite the existence of supermarkets and online retailing. And they really serve as places to get fresh food, but also your daily conversation, so to speak.
Market traders have had a pretty rough time in recent years because supermarkets have become much more prevalent, as has online shopping. So it's very difficult for them to persuade shoppers to come to the market. So what they have to do is provide something different, if you like, a kind of unique selling point. Why would you go to a market rather than quickly order something online?
We didn't just approach markets as static, pre-produced, contained, bounded spaces, but thought of them more as constantly being reproduced and molded, partly through the movements of the traders themselves, but also because of the kind of environment that they found themselves in. And our project ended up coinciding with the COVID pandemic, so that changed the dynamics quite drastically, and we saw a lot of changes to these markets as we carried out the project.
So market traders have to arrive early in the morning. They set up their stalls. This is a very arduous process. Some of them took 2 hours to set up their stalls. The physical infrastructure of the stall, also laying out the product in such a way that it was attractive to people. A lot of them had really good displays, for example, like the fruit and veg stalls were very aware of putting the oranges next to the lemons, next to the watermelons to look attractive, or to put them in the right order so that when people came to pay, they passed more products that they might want to buy. So the display function, setting it up, and then at the end of the day, taking it away again.
We've argued that public spaces in general, but markets in particular, should no longer be considered in terms of this spatial boundedness or fixity, but that we have to understand them as nodes in domestic and transnational networks, as nodes in bigger mobility relations. And we have advanced this notion by following the everyday practices of one of the most important actors that make markets work, which are the market traders. We found out that markets are not often as inclusive as often assumed in existing studies. We found that markets are full of social boundaries, that they are full of control and regulations.
I also relate the rhythms of the marketplace to the emergence but also disappearance of the market with the labor behind the scenes. So people get up very early in the middle of the night to get their stuff at the marketplace at a certain time, and that happens for them in a weekly or daily basis. And that's what we call the rhythms of the marketplace. How people move and move towards the market, but also back from the market. How the materials are, let's say, built in a particular way that the marketplace emerges in the public space. So the transformation of space, the transformation and the making of the market is an intervention in space, in that sense, in the urban fabric.
So the day of a market trader is extremely long and extremely arduous. Not only do they have to set it up, and that's a very complicated process, they have to know where to source the commodities. This is often quite complicated. They might be bringing in bedding from Turkey, for example. We met a guy who was selling clothes and underwear on the market who brought all his cotton from Turkey. They have to plan. You can't just buy products willy-nilly. You have to plan when you've run out, when to bring new things in. Often they run websites these days because quite a lot of market traders sell online as well as selling on the market. So they have to learn how to use the internet. They have to have the social skills that I was talking about to engage their customers. They can't just stand there and not do anything. I mean, some of them do that, but that doesn't give them a very successful outcome. And they have to learn how to deal with bureaucracies. To get a market stall, they've got to deal with their local authority. They've got to deal with a market manager. So it's a very multi-skilled job, and I think that they're totally underrated.
The most interesting thing to find through the project is actually the behind the scenes, what it takes for markets to exist. They are often portrayed as having very low entry barriers, so there's no need to pay rent or to speak the local language very fluently, etc. But through spending so much time on markets and with traders, we came to appreciate that it's certainly not so easy to do this job. On the contrary, access is already difficult. Often it's arranged online, and in the case of the Netherlands, in Dutch. And then you need to have the money to invest in vans, stalls, to buy your products, while it becomes increasingly difficult to get loans from the bank, as permits are no longer provided for a lifetime, but a limited amount of time. This, in theory, provides newcomers the opportunity to enter the market, but it really makes it difficult to actually acquire the funding to do so. And many markets have a selection system based on seniority and waiting lists, making it almost impossible to enter popular markets as a newcomer. And when you actually have a spot, the actual hard work begins. Commuting between the home, between different markets, purchasing your merchandise at the wholesale market, fetching orders, loading and unloading of overstock, moving continuously between these different locations in which these activities takes place. So this really requires long work days, specific divisions of labor, relations of support. And through that, we uncovered unequal power relations and certain gender patterns and social economic inequalities through which some traders have better access to markets than others.
So this idea of looking at marketplaces not only as local marketplaces, but looking at the mobilities behind was really eye-opening on a methodological, but also on a theoretical level. For example, very often when I talk to people about this project during the research, everyone was convinced that markets are very local. But what does it mean, local markets? Actually, markets are extremely transnationally related. So once you have this mobility perspective, you realize that there's a lot of mobilities going on behind the scenes of the market.
But it means also that local is actually an issue which is really used to promote the business on the market. So having this idea of the product is a local product will sell very well, because it is assumed a priori that if it is local, whatever this means it is of good quality. So we have on the one side this idea of local, which is really promoted by on the market, like you have traders put the names and you see it's a real Swiss name. You can identify it as an original, authentic, if you'd like to, Swiss name, which then is like a kind of a guarantee that it's a local product and it will be of good quality, even though maybe this trader is traveling all around on his fields in agriculture or working migrants from other countries. So there's this kind of a tension or a paradox when it comes to mobility and locality.
So the street vendors were physically mobile in the city, were often people from marginalized communities. A lot of Jewish street vendors were working in the city at the beginning of the 20th century in the Netherlands. But you also had official markets during that time. So I think there were 6 or 7 official markets where traders worked. And then you had the street vendors who were physically mobile and sold their products in the streets. And at the beginning of the 20th century, you saw that the group of street vendors expanded significantly. And they were a thorn in the side of the city authorities because, they were disrupting traffic. They were pitching. Pitching was also seen as a low-class activity during that time. So what they did is that they put in place a lot of street vendors bans, especially in 1900, and they tried to immobilize the mobility patterns of street vendors. So it actually tried to turn street vendors into market traders who already worked on the official markets. So mobility, being mobile, was seen as disruptive and as problematic. So they tried to immobilize them on the markets, and the number of street vendors really went down, and there are no street vendors in the city anymore. So when you look at current market studies, they only say, okay, so the redevelopment of markets and the disappearance of street vendors is an effect of the neoliberalizing city. Whereas we've tried to show that's not only neoliberal urban policy, it was actually policy that was already in effect at the beginning of the 20th century in the context of the industrializing and the modernizing cities.
So one of the main findings of our project is that there's an entire network behind a singular trader. We followed a Dutch flower vendor and revealed that it's not just him who does all the work at the market, but there's an entire network behind him. So he has his sister-in-law making the bouquets, his brother-in-law driving to the auction to actually get the produce that he ordered online. So there's this family network behind the trader that enables him to be active at multiple times, to work on different markets, but also to actually be there at the market early in the morning without having to drive first to the wholesale market to get the flowers. And that really opened up a world behind the market for me.
On the one hand, I would follow them or accompany them to the markets and see how they were setting up their stalls in one place or another, observe them for a good couple of hours. At times I could also do the selling myself, being inside the stall. I accompanied one of the fruit vendors, for example, to a small tiny market in Catalonia again, and could do some selling again, see how that skill works, and see from within the stall, let's say, how the interactions with other traders on the sides also work, which were great insights. And in one occasion, for example, I could also go with one of the informants to the farm where they produce their milk products, cheese and yogurt and things like that. And I went to graze the sheep with her. I think there were about 90 or 100 of them. So this was also interesting in terms of seeing the original territory where the product really comes from in terms of the food of the sheep. So I think that gave us some interesting insights also to understand the geographies of production and the interconnectedness of markets, not only within the different marketplaces, but also the spaces of production.
There's sort of two main ways in which markets are organized and regulated in the UK. They're either run by a council and part of public governance, or they are regulated by a private body, which could be like a town centre initiative. And so there will be those different interests might be reflected in how they're regulated. But in the case of London, I looked a bit into the history, and it was sort of relatively late that market regulations actually came into force in the UK. I mean, it was left to just develop on the side, and it took a while before council realised they had to impose some sort of opening and closing hours and some cleaning regime and things like that. The traders kind of complain about the managers. I guess these are often kind of very independent-minded people who have chosen to work for themselves and not for an employer, and they don't necessarily like someone coming and telling them how to organize their business.
So when it comes to the future of markets, I think we cannot really talk about a one future for all marketplaces, right? Because it really depends a lot on the regulatory framework. So on the one hand, within the European Union context, there is the so-called Bolkestein Directive, which says that by 2025, in the markets of Catalonia, there needs to be a shuffling, let's say, of licenses. So basically all traders that have their licenses now only have it until that year, until 2025. And this basically gives the local and city councils the opportunity to make decisions of who do we want to maintain at the marketplace and who should leave.
So the future of the markets. I guess this really depends on the markets. We were looking at very different markets. So I think that with the current trend to local, even organic food, I think for the farmers markets, the future is very bright. There are more and more farmers, agricultural producers, but also traders who buy in the morning from the agriculturists and then sell it on the markets. that really make a business only out of markets, these markets won't suffer too much from also the structural changes. For the markets of goods, traders are extremely pessimistic. There is also a whole generational change going on. Some of the businesses are not taken over by the younger generation. These are the traders who have huge cars that drive around all over Switzerland to be present at different markets. And some of the younger generation are taking over, but some of them are not, because it's an extremely hard business. And here I rather see a development into new spaces such as events, mega events, where markets would also be part of the event, but it's less markets per se, as has traditionally been the case.
We would like to thank the market traders, HERA, the National Association of British Market Authorities, and the National Market Traders Federation.